Welcome, fans, to a special edition of the Great North Wrestling Podcast live on thehannibaltv.com. My name is Jack Kilby, Executive Vice President of Great North Wrestling, and I'm pleased to have on today a guest that has a unique perspective in terms of the wrestling business, but also what her experiences have been growing up as the child of perhaps one of the most famous, lauded professional wrestlers in the history of business from the golden age. That would be the daughter of Jake the Snake Roberts, Brandy Smith. Brandy, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you.
What a lot of the fans are interested in when we talk about the children of famous professional wrestlers, especially during the time frame of Jake, when the business was, at its peak, exploding and has so many stories to tell. But in your situation, what was it like when you were growing up as the child of Jake the Snake Roberts?
Well, it was both positive and negative. I mean, as you can imagine, because as has been widely publicized, Jake also had an addiction issue. So that kind of went along with his wrestling career. And so unfortunately, I had periods of time where I didn't spend time around Jake. He actually protected us as his kids, I feel like, from his using self in some ways, and in other ways was just on the road so much that seeing us in Texas while living in another state. My parents divorced when I was literally, at the end of the second grade. So I would go and spend summers and spend, time during the holidays or school breaks with him, and really had an opportunity to see him when he came through the area. If he was ever traveling through the area, as they often did, as driving and such, before he got into WWE. And so it's been unique in the way of boys didn't want to date me. Girls were scared of me. And I think the boys were too, to be honest. So they always wanted to know, so did your dad teach you how to DDT? And I'm like, no, because I can handle myself. And they would kind of laugh at that and then also be a little bit frightened, I think. So, but, it's also been a lot of fun to travel, to get to spend time with him at matches, to see how people respond to him as a professional wrestler, and to see the absolute legend that he is, as you know, and to get to experience that on a personal level next to him it's shaped who I am, I believe, a little bit. I mean, I received a PhD in counseling psychology. I mean, this is something, he was the psychologist of the ring. Here I am, a psychologist working in addiction for over a decade at the VA, and unfortunately medically retired. But it truly is one of those situations that I think he taught me a lot about life without having to necessarily speak the words, but just show the actions. And so it was quite interesting in a lot of different ways. So
you mentioned something there that immediately twigged my interest, and that's the fact that I think it's arguable, if not nearly indefensible otherwise, to place Jake Roberts at the top of the pantheon for psychology in wrestling, ring psychology, and also his very, very accomplished promo ability. When you were looking at a career choice, was this something that was in prominence of your mind? Did he influence that at all? Because I think it's really, really cool that you pursued that career path.
He did influence it in a lot of ways. I think that the biggest way that he influenced it was not necessarily through his psychological promos or that type of thing, because I understood that even as a kid, that he was a good talker, that he could talk so well that it put people in a certain type of emotion. And that part was fascinating to me. And so I literally, wanted to understand more about emotion. I wanted to understand about addiction and to really be able to comprehend what it was that he was able to take people on a ride without even knowing them. He could take people on this ride of emotion and make them dislike him so much, and also still be someone that people rooted for as well. And then, after that, it was pretty much, I really was interested in understanding, like I said, about addiction. And I wanted to know as much as I could. And my mom taught me education was the way to do that. And so I went to get a master's degree and then a PhD, and really felt like that has benefited me overall in life and in, continuing to be part of Jake's life. So, because we're much closer now, and people don't often realize that. They've seen some of the documentaries and they think, oh, well, we're distant or we're estranged. Well, that's not the case. We live in the same household. We spend a lot of time together. My partner lives here as well. Jake has, health difficulties that we help with and we're able to assist him with. And so it really is a closer relationship. But I think that psychology and that background and the understanding of, when you get sober, he's been sober 10 years. So 10 years is a long time to be sober. He got sober, as you know, with Diamond Dallas Page and in the accountability crib. And, that was back in 2013 when they were first starting to film that. And it helped a tremendous amount to see their process as well. And just to begin, spending more time with him and understanding kind of his approach to life and how he functioned, because I didn't necessarily understand that previously.
That's tremendous. First of a few fan questions. Bill wants to know, do you have any thoughts on Rick Martell and what wrestler did you have a crush on growing up?
Oh, that's great. That's great. So I didn't have much contact with Rick Martell. I really didn't. So as a kid, I was born in 75. So Jake introduced me more so to wrestling as I became a young woman. So at the age of about 12, I started traveling a little bit with him. And my high school graduation present was almost 30 days in the Philippines with 30 wrestlers. And so it was a lot of fun. And, some of them were female wrestlers. It was just a lot of a great time to be able to enjoy that with him. But the wrestler I had a crush on was this is going to sound so embarrassing. It was actually from the Powers of Pain. I really loved, I would walk into the locker room and see these tree trunk legs, and just this huge Samoan man. And I am from a small town in Texas. And so where Jake's from Gainesville. And so it was a surprise to me to see these enormous men that were so kind and gentle. And the Barbarian was one of those that was just absolutely took me under his wing, made sure I was taken care of, didn't leave me, in any situation that would be negative. So he would be the one that I probably had the biggest crush on growing up. And of course, the Rock and Roll Express were always, how can you not, right? So as a young woman, I definitely did.
Yeah, Barbarian is a great human being. We've had him in Great North Wrestling numerous times, and you don't get much better people than Barb. In terms of now I asked you specifically what it was like growing up in the household, or being the daughter of Jake. But do you have any observations globally on, or can you separate the two, of what it was like to be a child of a pro wrestler, just in general, and the response that you get from people that may or may not be initiated in the pro wrestling industry?
I've really not experienced anything negative. It's all been positive. The wrestling community, as his daughter, they've been very welcoming. I traveled with Jake for quite some time, for several years on the road, just helping drive, do whatever it might be. And I really was accepted and welcomed. I never got negative feedback. The only things that I would say is I think that could have been different when he was still using. So, and I did most of my traveling with him after he was sober. And so that, I think, makes a little bit of a difference. And I think that the people that you're around in professional wrestling, they understand that there's a whole process that you go through as the child of someone as overshadowing, if you want to put it that way, or as large as Jake is. And so they really kind of took me in as one of their own, and just, let me know that, hey, if he's not around, we're around. We're here for you. We're available. We understand what it's like to be in this kind of pressure, under these lights, under all of this. And you can still be a young woman. And I don't think Jake necessarily knew how to do that. He didn't know how to be a parent, really. He knew what he didn't want to do, but he didn't know what to do, especially with me being the oldest, being a female. I think that I always knew he loved me, and it was still really hard for him, and other people could kind of verbalize that a bit more. So it was always nice to walk through hotels and go through, stadiums and whatnot, and have the fans, calling out to him. And then once they realized who I was, they were absolutely positive toward me as well. Any documentary we've done, other than, the very first, have been very positive. And I think some people, if I could mention it, I think some people didn't understand my perspective during Beyond the Mat, and being really angry with Jake still. And they saw that as wanting to be, that they saw it as, can't you be more caring and loving? And I'm like, well, I've done all that. I'm angry now. Like, I'm angry when he talks about suicide. That was back, as we know, that was back in the, late 90s. And so he was in a much different position. So yeah, that's been the only negative response.
Well, we'll definitely get to Beyond the Mat, because of some of that content that you touched on. But before we go there, what, in terms of the events that you attended with your father, stand out in your mind? Two-part question, and second part being, do you have any particular favorites, either in terms of a moment or a match that Jake was in?
One of my favorites was being 13, being in Toronto for WrestleMania, and just the grand scale of it, and how big of a star Jake was then. And it just was, and the hotel in Toronto was the Sky Dome, and so it was beautiful, and everything was brand new, and it was a place I hadn't been. And it was a real privilege, I felt like, to be invited. The next year, my brothers I have twin brothers who are 5 years younger than I am, and they went to California. And I still love the fact that I got to go to the Sky Dome and see him perform. And truthfully, that is one of my favorite memories. And I remember a funny story, but probably, I don't know how appropriate I need to be here, but
Go for it.
So we were at breakfast. Actually, it was probably around lunchtime, but we were just having breakfast in the hotel, and Ric Flair came down. And, you know, Jake and Rick have had an interesting relationship at times. And again, this is when Jake still wasn't sober. And so I just remember Rick coming in and Jake being like, and I do call him Jake. I know that's kind of odd to some people, but, you know, in a business relationship, I'm careful about that too. So, but when my dad came in, or when Rick came in, my dad says to me, "Oh, watch, you'll think this is great." And I'm like, all I felt was anxiety. And so I look over and my dad's whispering in the bartender's ear, and he says something, and all I see is Rick turn around about 5 minutes later with a shot glass in his hand. And he cheers, you know, like, "Hey, cheers to you, Jake. Thanks for the shot." And he goes to drink it and then spits it all over the bar and all over the bartender. And I'm like, "What did you do?" And he's like, "I sent him a shot of vinegar and water." Because that was that I guess was their, you know, how they ribbed each other and everything. And so it was like the douchebag shot, essentially, like giving each other the hardest of hard times. And I'm like, all I could feel was anxiety, but it was a great trip and a lot of fun. So
Yeah, that was quite an event. I had the pleasure of being in the crowd there that evening as well. Yeah, being a Canadian. In terms of your involvement in WWE, WWF specific events, did you have any interactions with the chairman of the board, Mr. McMahon, or his children, Stephanie or Shane?
I actually didn't. My brothers saw Vince the following year, and when they were in California, and so they have some pictures with Vince, and I think even with Stephanie as well. But I didn't have any interaction with Vince at all. All I knew was my dad's perspective on Vince, which, you know, has tended to be not super encouraging. So I was certainly not looking for those opportunities though either, knowing, you know, that there was some level of tension or conflict there.
Fair enough. A fan on social media wanted to ask about the angle involving your father and Randy Savage with the Cobra, and that remains, and I share this fan's perspective on this. That remains one of the most memorable angles ever. Did you have any discussions with Jake about how that went down and went wrong?
Oh, absolutely. I've had a variety of conversations with him about it. He talks about it in his comedy show. So, I mean, it's something that I don't know, I guess throughout my life, and plus it's been the largest picture that everybody wants, right? Is that photo. They want that one signed. And so to me, it was that moment of, aha, okay, I get it now. I get why the snake. I get how, and because I'd always understood the creepiness of it, or the, you know, that people have an aversion to it. By the way, with Jake, that aversion is not allowed, meaning that even though he is terrified of snakes still,
wow,
terrified, I knew that if I showed that I was scared of them, he would torture me with them. Because that's how he is. He was just that guy that was going to make you get over it. He was going to make you realize that it's not that big of a deal. Get over it. Come on. And he also wanted to see people he loved to see people squirm. But the conversation about the actual in-ring performance, it was surprising to me to learn that, you know, one, that Macho Man made him allow, or asked for him to allow the snake to bite him first. I didn't recognize that until years later, that, you know, Macho Man was afraid that it hadn't been devenomized and that he was actually trying to take the belt, right? And so he made him bite it first, and when he did, and Jake was all right, and Jake can do the entire impression, which is hilarious, of course, but he's like, all right, brother, you're just going to sit there for about 10 minutes and let's see if this snake's really fixed, and so it was just a lot of fun to hear him talk about that, and then to hear him say, I couldn't get the snake off. We literally could not get the snake off of his arm. I'm pulling, the snake is not letting go. I'm pulling, the snake is not letting go. And it was, of course, great television, but also was somewhat distressing to Jake. And of course, Macho Man the entire time is, enduring that pain. So lots of conversation about that one.
Mm-hmm. Such a great moment that's very unlikely to be replicated in this day and age. Another fan question is with respect to your knowledge of your father's opinion or working relationship anyway with the late Ultimate Warrior.
Oh, absolutely. Meaning how that went, or what it was, how it resolved, or the conflict, or overall, you're saying?
Just overall, but I think the way the narrative is out there, Jake was poised to have a big time run with Warrior, and looking from the outside in, Warrior sort of derailed that, and there was that tension, and just wondering if that was ever resolved between the two parties.
It actually was resolved. You're right that Jake was very angry for a very long time, and even I was at the Hall of Fame induction, of course. I mean, all of his kids were. So, and at that induction, prior to the induction, we were all staying in the same house, and he was talking about the Warrior, and he was still extremely negative and angry. And, he cost me a lot of money. Because they were, like you said, supposed to have this big run. And that, in Jake's mind, that would have solidified him financially, and would have helped in a lot of ways with his family, both, and with him. And literally, he made the comment that he planned on knocking him out at the Hall of Fame induction. And we were all just like, really, this is where we're going to celebrate you, and this is what you're planning to do? I mean, what are you doing? This is your moment, and you're going to let it be overshadowed. And Jake very much would say the same thing, that that's what he was prepared to do. He turned around, the Warrior was right there, and he apologized immediately and said, I am so sorry. I know what I cost you. I know what happened afterwards. And I am so sorry for doing that. It was, he went on to explain, it was ego, it was conflict about other things. It wasn't about you. But that took all the wind of Jake's anger out. And they ended things on a positive level, where they were able to say, okay, we're going to be all right. And then, as you know, he passed away just days later. So
that's a great ending for sure. I wanted to ask you, turning to your involvement in the film we alluded to earlier, and that being Beyond the Mat, how you came to be involved and your understanding of the process. And the second part of this question is what your reaction was to the very negative, unfair, I would say, and in some instances, portrayal of Jake in the film, and all the controversy that followed that release.
Beyond the Mat was a hard one. And there's a reason Jake doesn't talk about it. I mean, he doesn't talk about it because he still has residual leftover anger about it. But I don't. Meaning, it was part of my process of healing. So that's how I took it in. Was I was living in Kansas at the time. I was in graduate school, and I got a phone call the day before he showed up. I hadn't seen him in several years and hadn't spoken to him in several years. And so I actually said to him, I'm not going to come alone. I'm bringing a couple of graduate school friends with me. And I'm not saying we have to meet with them all together, because I understand, but you're bringing a freaking film crew. Like, and what I said to them at the time was, he doesn't have these conversations without lights and cameras. He doesn't have the honest level conversations at that age and at that point in his life, still using. The only time he had those conversations was with film crew there. And that also made me, of course, very upset as his daughter, that these were conversations we had needed to have for a very long time. And he had avoided them, or had at least muted himself anytime we would start to have any level of conversation about it. And then the process, I remember Barry, the producer, saying, well, I was just so really surprised that the only person that any of the editors had a negative feeling about was you, Brandy. And I was like, excuse me? And he was like, well, when we cut the tape together and when we did all the editing and such, that people wondered why you were so angry with Jake, why you couldn't accept his. And I was like, wow, really? Because I think I was just being honest with him and saying to him that I thought that suicide was the easy, because he was talking about suicide in the moments that they were talking about, and that he had wished to die many a time. And I don't know about any other daughter out there, but as Jake's daughter, to me, that was just absurd. It was like, wait a minute, I get how you can feel that way. And you recognize what you're taking away from your children. You're taking away the opportunity for us to build and grow with a relationship with you. That's not what any of us are looking for. We're not looking for you to be absent. We're looking for you to be more involved, not less. And so somehow that just didn't, I guess, come across the way that I thought it did, at least to the editors. I don't know. That was the one that, like I said, still kind of bothers Jake. And I've certainly had to work through that part of the process too, of that angry moment and those angry moments of, wait a minute, I get to have emotions too here. I get to feel a certain way about you being gone, or you being, I would have friends, for example, people that didn't know me in high school. I went to a small high school. My class was 150 people graduating class. So small high school, but everybody knew who Jake was because, of course, he was from the same town. And I would get smart aleck comments about, oh, so how's your dad? How's your dad? I don't fucking know. Why don't you call him and ask him? Because we didn't have a relationship at that point. Or in sports, I would be called Lil Snake. And that made me insane because I had my own identity as a young woman, and I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet, not on the merits of my dad's stature and wrestling, but on what I was creating for a life. And so that was some conflict that I kind of had to work through internally too, is that I don't have to be in his shadow.
Speaking of films, this is a very interesting question from a wrestling historian. Does Brandy agree that the Wrestler movie was influenced by her and Jake's relationship? Excellent movie in my books. But
so I believe it was an excellent movie as well. I loved the movie. It was hard to watch, very painful to watch. There were a lot of moments that felt very personal, meaning that I felt like there were pieces of our relationship and our family life that were put into a film without us knowing. And what I will say is that there are a lot of wrestlers, I'm guessing, that have those types of relationships with their daughters specifically, where there's some conflict, where there's some unspoken difficulty, that type of thing. But I don't know what else to say about it other than beautiful movie. Not really sure. I know that Jake has thoughts about that as well, that he felt like that was somewhat based on a lot of his character and his experience. So,
yeah, absolutely. One fan question that seems to come up a lot is the later era Jake in WWF, when he was there during the embryonic moments of the Attitude Era, and his involvement in that King of the Ring that really kicked everything off with Austin 316 and the match and et cetera, et cetera. Did Jake have any sense that Stone Cold was going to blow up to the level that he did? And does he have any recollections around that match in general?
He does speak about that match quite a bit. I mean, I had met Steve Austin, I don't know, months and months before, and was floored about how he blew up. Just really was very surprised when that all occurred, because he was a much smaller man when I met him. He was, there were some real changes that had occurred in his character, that he became so amplified in this kind of crowd drawing way. And Jake would probably be a better person to ask about the actual King of the Ring type situation. But I know that he thought that Stone Cold had absolutely the ability and the brain to be large and larger than life. And there were conversations, essentially, according to Jake at least, there were conversations between Vince and Jake about, can you take any person and make them a great wrestler if they've got some core qualities? And Jake said, essentially, watch me do it. This is who I'm going to do it with, because he's got the basics. He's fabulous. I think you can push him to the top. He's going to be your next, star. And according to him, Vince didn't necessarily agree with that and was kind of kicked back saying, okay, let's see what you can do. And as we know, it really did blow up. So
another fan question, and this is one that I remember from my childhood as well. Do you remember the angle between Jake ravishing Rick Rude and Cheryl Roberts on TV?
Of course, Cheryl's my stepmom. I mean, she and Jake are back together. They've been back together for a couple of years now, and so I absolutely remember that. I remember being a young woman and being so impressed by her. Just so very taken by her magnetism as well. Mm-hmm. She had her own draw. And I could see that when she walked to the ring, how she carried herself. It was different than I'd ever seen. My mother is very, very calm, very low spoken, very almost, she's extremely polite. She's a farm girl. And so that was a very different perspective to see Cheryl in leather and dressed up, and just the way she carried herself, like this strong, empowered woman that was willing to do whatever it was that she was willing to go out into the ring. I mean, not many women would have the confidence to do that. And I was always impressed by that. And of course, I remember the feud between them. I remember whenever he unveiled the pants with Cheryl's face on it, I could not have been more mortified. So
yeah, they don't produce angles like that anymore, do they?
No, they really don't. They really don't.
So we talked about the Beyond the Mat experience. Can you juxtapose that with your involvement in the very uplifting redemption of Jake the Snake Roberts, Doc?
Yeah. So that was a real enjoyable moment to be a part of. Just to be there to be in Atlanta, to be there and to be at DDP's house, to be filmed for that it was supportive, it was caring. I was asked difficult questions, but it was the manner in which I was asked those questions and with the respect of how it was handled and how they edited their material on Jake. As you saw, I mean, in the resurrection, they certainly show Jake not well. I mean, he's literally intoxicated at one point. He's crying at another. I mean, it's very difficult to watch that kind of him coming together and dealing with his own internal demons. And yet, what I knew is that I had seen Jake months before, my brothers and I, and the grandkids. And I don't have children, but my brothers do. And we had taken the kids out to see Jake, and he was the heaviest he'd ever been. The same house you see him start off in, that's the house that we went to. And it was so painful to see him that Christmas that we all left there wanting to either smoke, drink, both, wanting to escape our own feelings as his children, seeing how short of a life he was going to have if he didn't change something. So I'm always grateful to Dallas and for what he's done for Jake. And I also know that Jake has to do the ongoing work, and he had to do the work in the beginning too, that Dallas could only take him so far. Jake had to be the one to choose to be sober and to make the choices, for example, to not travel alone for a while, for several years. He gave up his driver's license. He did some things. Jake didn't have a driver's license for 10 years because he knew if he had a license, he would find a place to buy. And I respect that about him and the conversation that he and DDP were able to have, that as a daughter or maybe someone outside of wrestling couldn't have had that level of impact on him. So
I have another fan question that kind of falls into the distasteful vein, if you will, but wanted to ask about the angle that they ran around the time frame of the start of the Attitude Era with Jake and Jerry Lawler, with the what was purported to be the real alcohol poured on him when he was trying to get sober. Do you have any thoughts or remembrances of that particular endeavor?
that would be one that I actually don't have knowledge of, to be just blunt. Jake's talked about it, or fans have asked him about it before. And so I know that some people have taken that really personally, that, Jake was in recovery and how could they, approach things that way. But if we're all being honest, wrestling is about how much drama there can be, right? And what could there be more drama about than about a man who had demons that he was fighting, and then now we're going to subject him to those same demons, right? I think that it was a difficult thing to watch as a young person, and a difficult thing to think about him going through. And he had certainly done worse to his own body for decades. And so I try not to judge it and let Jake speak on those things, because I just don't have any direct knowledge of how that went down or what came about, or if it was actual alcohol or not.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that would be the rub when, say, iced tea could be used or whatnot. Ivan wants to know, of course, have you ever met Andre the Giant, and do you have any Andre stories?
So I did meet Andre whenever I must have been, I think I was 4 or I don't know. I was a young kid, very young. So kindergarten age, I'd say 5 probably. And I have a picture actually of Andre's hand and my hand in Andre's hand as a little girl. But that's the only lasting photo, I have of him. But I remember, my grandfather was 7'1". So it's not as if I hadn't seen super large people before. I mean, at some points, Grizz weighed, over 450 pounds. So just like Andre, he was enormous. I came up to his elbow. So I have more memories, I guess, of his presence because of him being around more than I do Andre. But Andre was very kind and very gentle is all I remember about him.
Did Jake ever speak to you about the difficulty working with Andre at that stage with the snake and those famous matches, given Andre's condition at the time?
He really didn't. He just did speak honestly that Andre was truly scared of snakes and that felt a bit sadistic in some ways to him to torture him on that level whenever he wasn't well. But that's all he's really mentioned.
In terms of your understanding of his impact on the business, what do you consider to be his most notable lasting legacy on the professional wrestling business, that being Jake?
I think his most iconic match, truthfully for me, is of course the Savage match. I mean, it just is. It's the Cobra biting it. It's that match. As far as his legacy, I think that Jake's legacy is really about how a person can speak and really come across in a variety of different ways if they will take the time, the energy, and the effort to actually work toward doing great promos again. I mean, he's doing some of that in AEW. I know that he really values that work because it's sort of a bit of a lost art, it seems right now. Or there are some that do it well, but those that don't do it well do it pretty poorly. And to me, nothing was better than watching him build up to a match because of the talk that happened beforehand. I watch more old promos of Jake's than I do old matches, if that makes sense. So I really feel like that's his lasting legacy.
Yeah, most definitely. It's too bad that the art of the promo, and it is an art, has seemingly. I mean, there are exceptions, of course, but that revolutionary style of Jake's in terms of not yelling and communicating, a real strong verbal intelligence certainly made all the matches that much more interesting. Another fan asked me if you ever considered, in any capacity, pursuing a career in professional wrestling, given your family connection.
So that's something I'm asked a lot. And Jake, my brothers are 6'3". So I am not. I'm 5'9", and I was a larger girl. I always have been. I'm not a small person, So to me, at that time period, that really wasn't something that was even an option, if that makes any sense, just because of my body style and where I was at physically. But Jake actually always steered us far away from professional wrestling. He, unlike some dads who might have said they wanted them, their kids to follow in their footsteps, what he said was, don't do it. You won't be home. You won't see your family. You'll give everything to a business that does not give much back. However, the fans will love you and it'll be an amazing ride. I can't tell you not to do it. And if you want a life that is in any way your own, then I would recommend that you not look at this line of work. It just didn't work for our family for whatever reason. I mean, my grandfather, same thing. You know, he never was one to encourage any of us to get involved in the wrestling business. They wanted us to get an education. That's what they pushed, was school, and whatever you want to do after that, and be happy. So
yeah, makes sense. In terms of that that time frame when Jake was departing the WWF at the time with the famous WrestleMania match with the Undertaker, etc. Do you know of his thoughts on that situation, and is it accurate that he was looking to transition to more of the creative booking side, and that wasn't in the cards?
he actually did transition to the creative side and the booking side for a bit. It just didn't go over very well given Jake's. What year are you talking about? Because we may be talking about two different sections, though, actually.
No, I know he was later on the creative team, but this was before his departure, his first departure with the match with the Undertaker, and apparently, so goes the narrative, he was looking to be a full-time creative team member, have some really heavy involvement there, and apparently that was promised by certain office people, and then it didn't come together. And there's also a story that he was refusing to go out for his WrestleMania match unless he was given that creative spot.
I actually don't have any knowledge of that. So my apologies for not having that history, but that's not something people have asked previously. I know that whenever I was in college, so it would have been around 1995 or so, he was working on the creative team, going back and forth to Connecticut, that type of thing. But I don't have any knowledge about the WrestleMania match. It wouldn't surprise me if Jake at that time kind of tried to hold some cards close to the vest, or try to, make sure that he's solid before exiting the ring. It wouldn't surprise me. I think that most of us would try to make sure we were at least taken care of, and of course had future plans with the agency or whatever it is. But I don't have any direct knowledge of that one.
I think that comes from the that compelling DVD release of a few years ago now. Jake the Snake Roberts, Pick Your Poison, the WWE release, in which I think that story is laid out. But moving on, another fan sent me a question about, do you have any knowledge or Jake's impressions as to why that run with WCW in the early 90s when he was programmed with Sting, what happened there and why it was cut short, and his thoughts on WCW at the time?
I don't have any of that knowledge. That's just not WCW. I know that was, certainly a portion of his career, but for whatever reason, we just haven't had a lot of communication about that. That's not been something that we've talked much about. I mean, he certainly has respect for Sting, and, I've not heard anything negative there. I just don't know what happened, actually.
Superfan Richie wants to know, is Jake, and I know you touched on this earlier, still attending DDP Yoga?
He actually is doing DDP Yoga right now on the road in Canada. So he was in Ottawa yesterday, and then he's going to be in Sudbury tomorrow. So he's been doing yoga with one of the DDP Yoga instructors that travels with him, Garrett. So he's just getting back into the swing of it. So he had taken a break for a while and really was just doing the gym more so and doing some yoga, but not as much. But I was at DDP Yoga this morning. So it certainly has been something that's been very helpful. My partner and I were there, the two of us, sweating it out and certainly feeling less flexible than we had, even just a couple of weeks ago. But it's really helpful and is something that I have encouraged Jake to be more fully involved with again, partially because of how it helps his thinking and how it helps his mindset. And so he's been going over a couple of days a week and working out with Dallas. And so they're doing that over at his house and then now on the road doing it with Garrett. So, yeah.
Yeah, shout out to DDP, who's been interviewed on the Hannibal TV a number of times, and I'm a fan of DDP Yoga myself. Certainly helps the joints. Fast forwarding to the present era, can you talk about how Jake came to become involved in AEW and his involvement in the company beyond the the on-air role and his management of Lance Archer?
Sure. AEW happened around, it was in 2019 that we had come back from a tour in Australia when they first reached out. I'm not really confident or sure as to how they selected Jake, along with many of the other legends, as you know, that they have involved in AEW currently and have previously. But I do know that Dallas has quite a bit of involvement with AEW and really has been helpful in a variety of ways for Jake. I don't know if that was behind the scenes or not, but I do know that he works on the AEW Together team, which, if you don't know about it, they're a charity organization. And so Jake has always had a huge love for people who have any differing abilities. He has 2 grandchildren with autism and cerebral palsy. But even before that, 25, 30 years ago, he was pulling people out of line that were in wheelchairs and saying, you don't have to wait. You can come up first. And one of my favorite things about Jake is that he knows how to make anyone feel like they belong. And so, for example, I have seen him put many a person in motorized wheelchairs in a semi-headlock because to him, he's like, they want to be wrestled with just like anybody else. And he never is harmful. He never hurts anyone. He's always very careful. And you'll never see a bigger smile or laugh than you get when, somebody feels like they belong and are truly a part of that world. And so that's been a lot of fun to see. So he does the AEW Together. They go out to a variety of charity organizations. They do children's hospitals, recovery centers, addiction recovery. They are doing the Best Buddies program. Literally bowling. It could be anything. And so he's an ambassador for that program and really enjoys his role there and enjoys the ability to give back to the community. And that's actually helped him spring forward into his recovery speaking engagements as well, just to make sure that continues to be a focus for him and that, people know that that's something he's interested in doing and really finds benefit in. He talks about it at the end of his comedy shows. He really believes that he has the ability to touch people's hearts and minds in a unique way that maybe a non-celebrity or their counselor or whomever it might be really haven't been able to yet. And so when he shares his story, he's very honest about his lows, his highs, his in-betweens. So, and he also, like I said, he still is doing the coaching of promos, helping some of the younger talent really focus on their promo skills, how to create their character development. And that is to me, that's going to be his legacy as well. Just that he's able to help people create these characters that are more robust than what we might see currently on some of the television for wrestling.
Well, Brandy, you've been extremely generous with your time today, and I appreciate it a great deal. But before I let you go, from a more global perspective, you indicated that at times being the daughter of Jake the Snake, it's had its positives and negatives, especially as a as a child, younger person. But as a whole, how do you feel about the wrestling business and most importantly, the fans that have so voraciously supported your father over the years?
That has always been impressive to me, and I've always been grateful to the fans. I mean, you can see it in the resurrection when fans have donated to do Jake's shoulder surgery, and they literally did so within 24 hours. The fans that come up to him on the road. So I've always loved the fans and felt like the fans loved Jake. Jake doesn't get a lot of heckling or negative feedback or anything like that. And he's certainly experienced and done some very negative things in his life that people could, put out there and focus on. But wrestling fans have really done an amazing job at supporting him, and I'm grateful to them. I'm grateful for what they've done in my life. I'm grateful for how it feels to be supported by just such a broad range of people. I mean, it is an eclectic group, and I love that about wrestling fans, that it's people from every background, every walk of life. And I believe that wrestling in general and the wrestling industry has huge positives that it puts out there, and it's entertainment. And if I remember that, right, as a kid, I couldn't really understand that it was entertainment so much. I thought it was actual true to life, he was getting injured. It's one of those things that if I can remember that it's entertainment, that it's fun, that it's there for a purpose, and that I just am very grateful to the fans and to the wrestling industry in general for supporting Jake the way they have, through ups, downs, through his recovery process, AEW for bringing him back. I mean, that has been the biggest blessing for Jake. It gave him in his later years, I mean, he's 68 now, and to be 68 and to be saying, I'm influencing new talent, not because of my YouTube, but because of being able to work with them directly. I have a lot of respect for all the fans and for the wrestling industry. There are, of course, things I would change. I mean, certainly. I mean, I'd like for medical, especially. I mean, that really concerns me, that these guys are giving so much of their bodies and their brain that then later on, they may not have the capabilities to do the things that they want to do in life, whether it's play with their kids or if it's related to, post-concussion issues, as we've seen in multiple documentaries as well. So, changes sure would be great. And I love the wrestling community. I'm very grateful that you had me on today. Thanks.
Well, where can the fans find you or keep up with you on social media? And do you have anything happening that the fans should know about?
So my Instagram is Team Snake DDT. So very simple, but that's my Instagram. And Jake has a shop that they can always go to, of course, jakethesnakeshop.com. It's easy. And that's a great place to get official merchandise, which we really emphasize that you can buy anything on a lot of platforms, but if you want something that's truly signed by him, that is authentic, then that's the place to go. Or to see him live if you can. Like I said, Jake's in Canada right now. He'll be in Sudbury at I'm not going to remember the name of the venue right now. That's awful. He'll be in Sudbury with a performance group there doing comedy tomorrow night. And then he's at London, Canada Comic-Con this weekend. Cool. So he's literally booked every weekend through the end of the year and has been since June. So if they're interested, follow Jake's social media, Jake the Snake DDT, so that they know that that's his official Instagram, and they can always see, what's upcoming for him there. So. Well,
again, Brandy, this has been very fascinating. Appreciate your time, and we'll keep in touch and keep on top of the goings on of Jake and yourself. Thanks again for coming.
That sounds great. Thank you so much again.
Fans, that's it for this special edition of the Great North Wrestling Podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates.